Hey everybody, in this video we're going to be talking about 5 reasons that you should be investing in Bitcoin today. So obviously, as of the recording of this video, the stock market's super volatile, it's up and down, it's like a roller coaster. So it has people looking for alternative things to invest in. So one that's taken a lot of the news over the past couple of years has been Bitcoin. And I'm an advocate of the cryptocurrency markets, especially Bitcoin. I think it provides a lot of sort of unique characteristics that basically investors essentially need. So in this video, we're going to go through kind of 5 reasons for that. So one of the biggest reasons to invest in Bitcoin right now is just the current market we're in. So we have, based over the past year, year or two with COVID, we've had massive dollar printing from the Federal Reserve, and which has now caused 7% inflation. So 7% inflation by itself is bad, but I actually think the numbers of inflation are not exactly what they say. And to kind of, before I dive into the why of Bitcoin with inflation, it's important to understand how inflation works. So inflation is basically the deterioration of the US dollar, or any dollar, or any value of currency. But in this case, we're talking the US dollar. So the US dollar is basically dying by 7% per year. So if you have $100, next year you're going to have $93. So that's inflation. And what's happening though in our current market is, there's obviously a huge economy, and the measure of inflation is not exactly perfect. And companies have kind of realized this. And so what you're starting to see is also what's called shrinkflation, which is basically the prices aren't changing, but what you're getting for that price is actually less. So Costco and some other big brand stores sort of did this throughout the pandemic, where they didn't change their prices, so that didn't show up in inflation, but there was shrinkflation because the amount they were actually giving you decreased. So I think that 7% is actually a smaller number than what we're seeing in actuality. Also, things like asset prices, like your home value, stock markets, etc., aren't factored into inflation. So I think that 7% is just a starting point. Where Bitcoin comes into that is that Bitcoin is actually designed to have a fixed rate of inflation per year, and actually it's lower and lower and lower and harder to create more Bitcoin each consistent year. So the algorithm basically gets tighter and tighter and tighter because there can only be a fixed amount of Bitcoin ever. So therefore, if you think about it like gold, there's only a certain amount of gold on the face of the earth. Well, as you start digging gold, you can get out of creek beds and things like that. It's super easy to mine. But once you get the low-hanging fruit, it gets harder and harder and harder to get it, because you're eventually blasting down mountains to find some gold. Same sort of concept, just from a digital standpoint with Bitcoin. So for an inflationary environment, it has a lot of the features that you'd want out of an investment, because it's designed to be controlled inflation, where we're in an environment that is very uncontrolled inflation. So from that standpoint, I think it's really perfectly suited for the environment we're in today. Second reason that you should invest in Bitcoin and is basically because it's been one of the best performing asset classes over the past decade. Yes, you've missed out on a lot of growth over the past decade. It's returned about 1,000,000% return, which is insane. But that being said, it's still really in its infancy. So it still has a lot of performance ahead of it. And that's the way a lot of analysts view it, is that Bitcoin over the next 5-10 years could hit $1 million plus coin. I've even seen studies where people think that it could hit $10 million over the next 10 years. So it has a lot of growth potential, especially when you compare it to things like the stock market, where Bitcoin, at least under my belief, is at its low value and infancy. So it's really, even today, when it's down a lot, or when it was up earlier, down 50%, either of those values I still think are way undervalued compared to where it should be. So long story short, where you look at the stock market's super highly valued compared to where it should be. Bitcoin super lowly valued but low valued compared to where it should be. So from that standpoint, I think the valuation's good. I think it's a really good investment from a return perspective. Again, obviously, this is an investment, this is speculation. There's no crystal ball of the future, so go into any investment with your own valuation perspectives. But that being said, I think there has a lot of potential, where a lot of the other asset classes in the environment right now are very minimal in their upside potential. Third is the adoption, and this kind of ties into the earlier comment of the valuation. I think Bitcoin is at its very early stages of adoption. Over the past 2 years, we've seen a lot more institutional players, aka the big boys with lots of money, start slowly dipping their toe into Bitcoin. I mean, you saw Jack Dorsey with Square Cash and stuff start investing a lot of their business reserves into Bitcoin. You've seen companies like MicroStrategies invest their cash into Bitcoin as an alternative to having just cash. You're seeing hedge funds get in the market. You're seeing endowments for universities getting into cryptocurrencies, especially Bitcoin. So you're seeing more of these big institutions with lots of money get interested in the space. Well, when there's lots of money chasing a finite amount of resources or a finite amount of Bitcoin, well, what's that mean? Prices go up. So as you see more and more institutional adoption or more and more big players getting interested in the space, well, it's just going to make the price go up and up and up because that you're going to have more and more dollars chasing a scarce resource. So institutional buy-in, I think, is going to be huge in the space. And you're starting to see just the tip of the iceberg, in my opinion. Other examples are even countries / municipalities getting interested in using Bitcoin as a actual means of currency. So, for example, Miami has done a lot of in the way of starting to use Bitcoin as an actual currency. Same with different countries in South America that have had massive issues with inflation are now using. So for example, in El Salvador, they're now basically using Bitcoin as their main means of payments. So they've dealt with inflation, so now they've gone the extreme other route. I can see other countries doing that in the future, just seeing the inflation that we're having here in the United States, even having a non-inflationary asset, or at least a fixed inflationary asset like Bitcoin, makes it very, very appealing to a lot of these countries. And so the more and more country buy-in you have, more and more institutional money coming into there, just the better it is for Bitcoin long term. Next reason that you should invest in Bitcoin is it's really easy to actually invest. So a lot of people think it's super complicated, like they don't understand how the cryptocurrency marketplace works, etc. But nowadays with Gemini, Coinbase, and other platforms, investing in Bitcoin is actually super easy. And I'm an advocate of Coinbase and Swan Bitcoin. Those are two institutions that I think do a really good job for Bitcoin, and especially from a dollar cost averaging perspective. So if you're not familiar with the concept of dollar cost averaging, it basically allows you to buy at fixed regular intervals. And so therefore you can, if the price goes up, well, you're still buying. The price goes down, you're still buying. So for example, today when the price is down, you're buying into the price being down. Well, Swan Bitcoin plus Coinbase allow you to do $5, $10 a day. So even if you're just starting out with investing, you can replace one cup of coffee and invest in Bitcoin instead, and just do that on a consistent basis. Next thing you know, you're starting to accumulate lots and lots of Bitcoin. So actually doing the investments super easy. So Swan Bitcoin as well as Coinbase are two really great platforms to make investing in Bitcoin super easy. The last reason that you should invest in Bitcoin, and this is going to be a bit of a controversial statement, but Bitcoin is, Bitcoin is a sort of antidote to a lot of the political strife that we're having in our country and all over the world. So Bitcoin is inherently diversified. It's non-centric, aka there's no one central point of origin. There's a central point of origin, but it's decentralized. There's no government control. There's no entity control or anything like that. So in a situation where we're at today, where you have, high discrepancy between the, high earners and the poor. So you have one of the biggest wealth gaps in history. You see that in the U.S. and abroad. You see these political turmoils, like right now as we're recording this video, with tensions between the United States and Russia and Ukraine. You see potential collapse in China with Evergrande, and also political turmoil between China and Taiwan. You see political strife between Democrats and Republicans in the U.S. Well, Bitcoin is inherently non-political. So if, for example, being the tinfoil hat doomsdayer here, which I don't necessarily mean to or don't mean to be political here, but it's just a fact of where we are today, that there is a lot of political tensions in our world. I mean, they may have always been there, but they're at least more prevalent in the news today. So that being said, having something that is apolitical and has no political motivation, just is purely powered by people and markets, can be a really powerful thing. Whereas, if there's political strife or wars, it can crush currencies across the world. Whereas something like Bitcoin should be relatively stable, just because there's no tie to any one specific conflict or any one specific country. So just where we are with political strife across the globe, I think it's a really interesting asset class. So these are the different reasons I think Bitcoin makes a lot of sense as an investment right now. And again, when it's really easy to start investing, you can start investing with minimal amounts, where the hurdle rate of thinking I have to buy one coin, and which is $40,000 or so at the recording of this video, that's a big hurdle. But you don't actually have to buy one coin; you can buy little fractions. So definitely check out Bitcoin. Obviously make sure this is a suitable investment for you. This is not financial advice for everybody. So just make sure you're doing your own homework. Make sure you're doing your own due diligence of whether it makes sense for you. But definitely think it's worth considering for your portfolio. Cheers.